Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this event turning to extremism. My name is Morten Langfeldt Dahlback, and I'll be chairing this event and guide you through some practical information. Before I invite our speakers up on the stage, I need to tell you some things. One of them is that during the break, which will last for 10 minutes, you can sign up for questions over here. And that's mandatory, so no questions without signing up. Then we'll start by having 3 presentations from our speakers. Then we'll have a musical performance. I will tell you what it will be later. And then the speakers will join me at a table for a conversation. And after that, we'll open the floor for your questions. So I don't think that the topic of extremism is extremely complex, and I don't think I should give an introduction to it. So I'm going to leave that task to Øyvind Strømmen, journalist and author, who I now invite to take the stage and give his presentation. Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation. I would like to start by pointing out a very simple fact, namely that extremism is sometimes a very easy word to understand, but it's a very hard word to define. If I talk to any one of you, I would imagine that if I say extremist or extremism to you, you would all have an image in your head, a picture of the extremist, an idea of who the extremist is. Someone is already pointing to the neighbor. And that's true. I mean, we can all picture the extremist, and when we speak about extremism, we have an idea what it is. And sometimes it's very easy to recognize something as extremism. However, the problem with the word extremism is that it is, in essence, a relative concept, meaning that it changes. It changes with place, it changes with time. And I would like to take an example, and I'm going to take an example which also is about a place not far from here. Back in the 1920s, a Norwegian author and writer, essayist, etc., traveled around Norway to give speeches which were based on the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, one of the most well-known works of conspiracy theories, saying essentially that Jews are behind everything that's bad in the world. And she traveled widely across Norway giving these talks. Her name was Martha Steinsvik. Amongst the places she visited was in Nord-Trøndelag, and she was invited by the Association for Rural Youth, or Bygdeungdomslaget in Norwegian, to come and hold these speeches, where she talked about Jewish influences and the secret works of a Jewish Masonic complot. She was also, this was also, of course, discussed in the newspapers, and some newspapers thought that what she said made a lot of sense. Amongst those newspapers were newspapers that were published by the Party of Farmers, Bondepartiet, today known as the Center Party. And she was also interviewed in 1925 in Aftenposten, one of the largest newspapers in Norway then as well as now, where she talked about the same things and said that the Jews were behind the First World War, they were behind the Russian Revolution, they were essentially behind everything that she thought was going in the wrong direction. And she also offered the opinion that Norway should reintroduce the legislation that we had in 1814 in our constitution, banning Jews from entering the country. In addition, we should also ban the Jesuits, like in 1814, from entering the country because they were a danger, and the Norwegian constitutional fathers had been wise not to allow them into the country. Now, I'm pretty sure that if I went around today giving lectures about these topics, I would be considered an extremist. I am pretty sure that I would not be invited by the Center Party, that they wouldn't write positively about me in the newspaper Nasjon, which still has some links to that party. Pretty sure about that. If I was interviewed in Aftenposten about this, I don't think they would just let me state my mind and not have any critical questions whatsoever about this. Pretty sure about that. But back then, so sure, some people looked upon Martha Stentvik as somewhat of a fanatic. It's true, back then also. But back then, this was not considered to be an extremist point of view. She also criticized the Catholic Church heavily and described in a book a dark conspiracy as well, where the Catholic Church was central. And I was not considered extremist. In fact, many Protestant priests enjoyed what she was saying. So extremism has changed. Now, another fact about Martha Stentvik is that she was actually the first Norwegian female theologian, and she was the first woman to ever hold a preach in a Norwegian Lutheran church. And she also wrote extensively about why women should be able to be priests. And I think, in fact, many people consider that to be more of an extremist point of view. So extremism changes. It's not a concept which is clear for all time and in all places. What is considered extremist in Norway is not perhaps considered extremist in another country. And what is considered extremist now, today, wasn't necessarily considered to be an extremist idea 100 years ago. This also works the other way around. Some of the ideas that we do appreciate today have been considered extremist ideas. Voting rights for women, an extremist idea. So extremism is a concept which is relative. Extremism is dependent on something being normal. Something has to be in the middle for something to be extreme. It actually, in Latin, means at the edges, outside. So when we talk about extremism, I think we shouldn't really talk that much about extremism. We should talk about the ideas. We should talk about what we consider to be the extremist ideas, and we try to find what are they? What do we see as being extremist ideas? And that's not that difficult. Then we can talk about normative extremism, things that vary so far from what we believe in, what we hold dear, that we think that's outside of the norm. So if I say that women should not be allowed to vote, that's an example. If I say that democracy is actually a horrible idea, that's an example. If I say a number of things that are ideas that sort of promote values that stand far from the values that are the norms of the society that we live in. But there is another kind of extremism as well, and I would like to talk about that one too, because I think it makes sense to talk about two different forms, the normative extremism and the descriptive extremism. And when I talk about descriptive extremism, I often take an example which is, well, extreme. And that is that Hillary Clinton is, in fact, a reptile being. She comes from, well, she hails, to be precise, from a planet called Nibiru. She is one of the Anunnaki. These are creatures that live amongst us, hidden amongst us. They drink blood, and they are also involved in a big complot to rule the world like they see fit. When I come with this theory, people will always laugh. But in fact, you can go to YouTube and you can watch lots of videos where people zoom into Hillary Clinton's eyes and, oh, look, she has reptile eyes. And you can read entire books about this topic. And there are indeed people that believe this to be true. And that's an example of descriptive extremism. You don't necessarily have to be anti-democratic to believe that Hillary Clinton is a blood-sucking reptile. But you are a bit sort of outside what is considered to be normal anyway. And the fact of it all, and let me end with that, is that although this theory is completely laughable, it is not a theory without consequences, without dangers. This is promoted, amongst other people, by a man called David Icke, who has a wide audience, big audience. And the theories that he promotes, for one thing, they also do connect back to anti-Semitism. There are connections between the ideas of Hillary Clinton being a reptile and anti-Semitism. David Icke also refers to the protocols of the Elders of Zion. So there is that part of it. He borrows from extreme right-wing sources sometimes, etc. There's that part of it. There's a danger there. The other part is that he also promotes other conspiracy theories involved with this. One of those theories being that vaccinations are, in a sense, a part of the same dark conspiracy, and they are used to control us. And this leads people to actually not vaccinate their children. And that has consequences. And I'm going to, in the panel, get back to many of other topics that I think is important, but let me take the final note. When I talk about this, it's easy to think of extremists as monsters, and it's important to remember they are not. They are people, just like us. Thank you.
Thanks to Øyvind Strømmen for an illuminating discussion of extremism, although I hope no lizards were offended. Our next speaker is an activist and co-author of the book Shameless. Please welcome Nancy Herz.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the great introduction. I would like to start by saying that talking about extremism and turning to extremism is a very broad topic. And fortunately, we will have time to discuss more in the conversation afterwards. But I want to tell you a story, and this story is about a girl I knew. And this girl is actually me. I grew up. Yeah, I don't know that many people, so I have to tell you my own story. But it feels like I used to know her, because that's not someone I identify with anymore. But a few years ago, I went to junior high in a small town in Norway. And I grew up not having that many friends. I didn't really like people. I walked around thinking that people don't understand things, that people don't understand that the world is in danger, we have to change the world, we have to work for human rights, we have to end all wars. I thought that I was the only one who got that. I was 13 years old. And I wrote a blog in English, which wasn't my first or second language, so it wasn't a good blog. But I really wanted everyone to know that we had to fight for a better world. However, that wasn't that easy to convey, not being the coolest kid in school. It wasn't that easy to convince other people that we should engage in issues that are bigger than us. So what I did is that instead of trying to convince everyone, because my family wasn't convinced either, I decided that I would just convince one side. So I had one mission, and that was to become the best Muslim ever. And as you can see, that didn't turn out that well. I'm an atheist today, so it really didn't turn out that good. But it was a good try. And in my quest to become the best Muslim ever, I had to start with choosing who I wanted to be, who I wanted to identify with, and who I didn't want to identify with. And growing up with a minority background in Norway, it's really easy to feel like one of the others. When I was growing up, I used to hear things like, oh, you brown people, you have brown blood, from kids in my school. People asking me if my father was going to marry me off. And it's really easy to feel like an outsider when you're constantly told that you're different. At the same time, I didn't really feel at home in my own community or in my family because I was always too white or too Norwegian. And that's why trying to become the best Muslim ever was the easy choice, actually. Because instead of trying to be everything at once, instead of trying to define my own identity and being both Norwegian and Lebanese and Muslim and everything that I believe in at the same time, it was much easier to just choose one thing. So I started isolating myself, and I've written about this in the book Shameless, which was briefly mentioned. So I started isolating myself, and on one side, there was this actual otherness. But on the other hand, I created this idea of otherness in my head, in which I was unique because I understood things that the other people didn't understand. And I actually even told my parents that they would burn in hell because they weren't good enough Muslims, so it was really bad. So there I was walking around feeling like an outsider, talking to people online who actually agreed with my ideas, who gave me a sense of community, and who told me that being a good Muslim, that's good enough, you're part of our group, you're part of our community, and we think that this is a really good thing. And I was also praised by my family because it was much easier to just be like everyone else in my community, or what I thought they wanted me to be, than to try to find all the other identities and try to be a real human being, to be honest. This, fortunately, didn't last for long. I was really fortunate to have parents who told me that I should get the hell out of the house and get some friends. They even paid me to make friends with people. So I was really fortunate in that sense. When I wanted to start wearing really conservative clothing in order to isolate myself even more, I wasn't allowed because my parents understood that something was going on. And what I want to tell you about this short anecdote isn't that everyone who wants to be a conservative Muslim is an extremist, but that there is a very small line between being really conservative or feeling like an outsider or trying to make yourself believe that you're doing something right and that you're lonely and that you're an outsider and that you're the other because you understand something, than to actually realize that this is an issue. This is an issue for the whole community. Young people shouldn't feel like they don't belong because that could have really dangerous consequences. And for me, I was really fortunate because I lived in this really small town. There was basically no one there who could come up to me and actually recruit me to an organization or recruit me to some kind of ideology. I had to do all the research myself. I had to be active. And when I found another sense of community, a few years later, when I started engaging in human rights and I found an NGO that believed in the same things as I did, it was much easier to be a part of that community rather than always trying to find someone who agreed with my ideas. But there's a slippery slope between feeling like an outsider and constantly being told that you're the other. And at the same time, trying to figure out who you want to be, who you really are. I didn't agree with all these extreme ideas or with all these conservative thoughts, but it was the easiest choice. Today, I'm actually quite shocked by some of the things that I used to believe in when I was younger, because even though I wasn't extreme in the sense of going out there and doing something extreme or going out there and speaking about extreme thoughts, I had some sentiments that I'm really ashamed of today, to be honest. And I understand where they came from. I understand why I felt that way, but I don't identify with them anymore. And for me, the biggest change was being able to find a sense of community in human rights, in democracy, in these important values that we all share. And unfortunately, it's a lot of times believed that democracy or human rights or being a free person with freedom of speech is a Western issue. And in my community, I was often told that you can dress like that when you become Norwegian enough, or you can't be like that because you're one of us, you're not one of them. And someone had to come up to me and tell me at the end that you don't have to choose, you don't have to keep choosing. You can be all those things at once. And I think that the youth, the people who are young today, we get that. We understand that it's not that simple. It's not black and white. We don't have to be either or. We have to shape our own identities. We have to be more inclusive. We get that. But there's a lot of people out there who don't. And our job is to make them get it. The previous speaker was speaking about extremism as a relative term, and extremism being what's different from everything else. However, I believe that there are some truths that we can believe in. There are some values that we can hold on to, even though everything is technically relative. And those things are human rights. Those things are democracy. Those things are the faith that we can be everything we are and everything we want to be at once, rather than keeping having to choose. I think I have a few minutes left, so I'll just say something about the situation in Norway today. It's a few years since I was in this situation, and fortunately, I didn't live in Oslo, which is the capital in 2015. Because in 2015, at the rise of ISIS, a lot of young people from Norway actually went to Syria. And I usually say something that might be a bit controversial, but I tell people that if I lived in Oslo in 2015, with the resources that I actually had, it wouldn't surprise me if I actually did go to Syria, just for the sense of belonging, just for the sense of feeling like I was part of a community. And a lot of young people actually did leave. And it's our responsibility to make sure that they don't. It's our responsibility to give young people a sense of belonging in our communities. And it's our responsibility to define this middle ground, to make it into something where everyone can belong. Or else, we'll have young people who are constantly told that they're not Norwegian enough, that they're not Lebanese enough, that they don't belong anywhere, and they'll end up fucking up. They will. And it might not even be their intent. Sometimes it's just about feeling like you belong. It's just about feeling like you have a community. And what I want to encourage you to, and what I want to talk about in the conversation afterwards, is how can we create a better social garment? How can we create a better social fabric? How can we make sure that young people don't fall through these holes in this really bad fabric, and rather make it so tight and so inclusive and open that everyone will feel like they belong? So that's what I wanted to share with you, and I hope that you'll be asking questions afterward. I hope that you'll engage in the discussion. And I hope that if you remember one thing from what I wanted to tell you now, it's not that I used to be messed up and I wanted to go to Syria. It's that there is hope. There is a way of making a change. And there is a way of giving people a sense of community in which they can feel at home with all their differences, rather than feeling like they have to be like everyone else in order to have a sense of community. Thank you.
Thank you to Nancy Herz for her thoughtful reflections on community and being an outsider. Our next speaker is an award-winning filmmaker and director of the movie The Girls of Golden Dawn. Please welcome Håvard Bustnes.
Hello, everybody. Yes, so I'm a filmmaker. I make documentaries, and in 2012, I didn't know very much about extremism. A friend of mine, the producer Christian Falk, he made a film called Black Hearts about black metal music. And one of the characters in this film was a member of the Greek parliament and the Golden Dawn party. And when I looked at this film and I started to search on the internet, I saw these people in Greece believing in these extreme theories, and I was really shocked, because for me, I've been traveling to Greece many years for holidays. This was my summer paradise. And when I saw that they believed in conspiracy theories about the Jews, like the first speaker talked about, it's pretty common in Greece. I was so shocked that I thought I have to find out, I have to learn more about this. So I decided to make this film, and my first idea was to make a film about how they raised their kids to become extremism. So I went to Greece in 2012, beginning of 2013. Golden Dawn had just became the third biggest party in Greece. They had, at that point, 7% of the population have voted for Golden Dawn, and then in September 2013, suddenly one Golden Dawn member killed a rap artist, Physsos, and then all the leaders of Golden Dawn were arrested, and everything changed. It was not possible for me to film the men anymore, and the women took the control over the party. So then I decided to follow the women, how the women tried to keep the party running. So that was how I got access to this party. Okay, I have a short clip. Let's see the beginning of the film.
To explain the difference between nationalism and Nazi.
No, because in that way I have to be in the part that explains myself.
Yeah.
I don't care about clearing that up.
Oh. Could you say that?
Hmm?
Yeah. You just say that you don't care about that fact.
So this?
Yeah, about the neo-Nazi thing, you don't care about it.
Η Χρυσή Αυγή έχει δεχθεί πολλούς χαρακτηρισμούς, ένας εκ των οποίων είναι ότι είμαστε νεοναζί. Εγώ προσωπικά δεν έχω να κάνω κανένα σχόλιο πάνω σε αυτό, διότι ούτε με αγγίζει, ούτε με αφορά, ούτε με ενδιαφέρει.
Ήταν τότε που ήταν ο Χίτλερ. Εμείς τι δουλειά έχουμε που τότε εμείς πολεμήσαμε το Χίτλερ. Τι δουλειά έχουμε με τον Ναζί και με τον ναζισμό. Άλλο το εθνικισμός, ο ναζισμός είναι για τη Γερμανία. Ο εθνικισμός είναι για την Ελλάδα. Ο ναζισμός είναι για τη Γερμανία. Τι δουλειά εγώ έχω με τη Γερμανία. Ναζί ήταν στη Γερμανία.
Sorry, when you say a neo-Nazi, do you know what exactly does it mean?
No.
It means nationalist.
Okay.
So what? It's neo-Nazi in German. What do you want to say?
Okay.
Είναι μαλακία, καταλαβαίνεις.
So when people say that you are...
It's just a lie. It's bullshit. It's neo-Nazi means nationalist in Germany.
Okay.
It's μαλακία.
So
Τι να σου πω.
Can you explain that?
Τι να πω τώρα με τη μαλακία. What's the difference between neo-Nazi and...
A nationalist. What is a neo-Nazi? Explain to me what you said. It's in Germany.
Δεν θέλω να πω άλλο για τον νεονάτσι. It's enough.
What happened to Greece? For me, it used to be blue skies and beaches, windsurfing and friendly people. A summer paradise for a guy from the cold north. But there is trouble in paradise.
Ότι μας είπανε Ναζί. 1, 2, 10. Δεν μας είπαν όμως ποτέ κλέφτες. Αυτό το χέρια μπορεί καμιά φορά να χαιρετάνε έτσι, αλλά είναι καθαρά χέρια. Δεν είναι βρώμικα, δεν έχουν κλέψει. Ας με πούνε κουμπιτό, όταν πως αυτός γνώρισε προκοπή, επειδή αρχίζουν να καταδούν και εξαρτήσουν.
Okay. So, Golden Dawn Girls, as you can see in this film, it's really extreme in Greece. So you have to define, is it a far-right party, is it a populist? But I will say this is a neo-Nazi party. And how was it for me? I filmed them for 3 years, and I have to say that, of course, in the beginning, it was really scary. They are famous to be aggressive against journalists, and it was also very shocking. I was really sad. You walk in this together with these people, and you hear people shouting anti-Semitist slogans, and I was really sad and shocked. But I also have to admit that after a year filming them, not all the time, but back and forth, I also became used to it, and that's really scary. That I was walking together with them, and then suddenly I were whistling their melody. And how is that possible? I was not shocked anymore. I was not sad anymore. And that scared me even more. I think that's something we should be... That's maybe one of the most important things I learned, that it is possible to get used to these extreme meanings. And I think that also happens in our society in Norway, that we are getting used to other ways of talking about other people. And that's very, very dangerous. And one of the other things I would like to discuss more afterwards is, so I think this is a lot about the conspiracy theories, and I understood how dangerous these theories are, because the main characters in Golden Dawn Girls, they believe that Greece is in a war. It's a war against Muslims, and when you are in a war, then you are allowed to use violence. So in their point of view, they do the good thing. It's not very easy to be a neo-Nazi in Greece. It's not something they do because it's funny. They do it because they feel that this is the right thing to do. They do it for their kids. So it's important to understand. So if you have read this book, if I read this book, and if I had all the information they have, and maybe I also would believe in their way of thinking. So it's not about being evil. They are very much like me. One of the characters, she is studying 2 master degrees. She has read a lot of books, and so they are. I think it's important to understand that they are intelligent and not monsters. Okay, thank you.
Thanks to Håvard Bustnes. Now we'll have a musical performance by one of Samfunnets multiple choirs. Yes, there are more than one. Here is Knausgård.
Songs today, 2 famous ones. The first one is Crazy by Gnarls Barkley, and the other one is Judas by Lady Gaga. Enjoy.
I remember when I lost my mind. Here's a song so best about that place. Even your most shining echo, so much space. And when you're out there, yeah, I'm not a touch. But ain't I didn't know enough. I just knew too much. Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Possibly. And I hope that you are having the time of your life. But think twice. That's my only advice. Come on now, who do you think you are? Ha ha ha, that's your soul. You really think you're in control? I think you're crazy. I think you're crazy. I think you're crazy. Just like me. My heroes had a heart, whose lives out on the land. And all I remember was thinking, I want to be like them. Ever since I was little, you know my fun. There's no coincidence how come. And now when I'm done, does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Possibly. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe you're crazy. Maybe we're crazy. Probably. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe you're crazy. Maybe we're crazy. Probably. When it comes to me, I am ready. I wash his feet with my hair if he needs. Don't leave him when it's done like to his grave. And when I flesh 3 times, he then breaks legs. I'll bring him down, down. A king with no crown, I'm just a holy fool, baby. But I'm still in love with Judas, baby. I'm just a holy fool, baby. But I'm still in love with Judas, baby. I'm in love with Judas. Even Professor David's crooked way. And their love is like a brick you can build a house or sink your dead body. I'll bring him down, down. A king with no crown, I'm just a holy fool, baby. But I'm still in love with Judas, baby. I'm just a holy fool, baby. But I'm still in love with Judas, baby.
In the most biblical sense, I am beyond repentance. Fame, hooker, prostitute, wench, vomits her mind. But in a cultural sense, I just speak in future tense. Judas, kiss me if offense, or wear your condom next time.
I wanna love you, but something's pulling me away.
That was Knaus Kure. It's now time for our break, which will last for about 10 minutes. During the break, you can sign up for questions here at that table. So please do that before the break ends. Afterwards, the panelists will join me here at the stage. something before I introduce our final panelists. There's been a change of plans with respect to questions. So we're going to pass microphones around. And so you can sign up then. Simply because not many people signed up over there. So I think we're going to make things easier for you and just give you a microphone so you can state your question. We've now been joined by Viggo Jan Vestel, a social anthropologist and researcher at Oslo Metropolitan University. And he's currently involved in a research project that looks at extremism among youth here in Norway.
Among other places?
Yeah, I mean, it's an international EU-funded project,
true.
right?
True.
So can you tell us some more about your research as part of that?
Yes, I can. Do you hear me? Yeah. Okay, the project that I'm working in is called DARE. It's supported by the EU, the program Horizon 2020, and DARE, it stands for Dialogue About Radicalization and Equality. And it's 13 countries that are participating, and we are interested in both right-wing extremism or radicalization, and also in radical and extremist Islam. So we do interviews in all these countries, where we're trying to meet young people who are able to reflect, to say something, to sketch out how they see the world, their trajectories towards kind of attraction with the extremist groups, and also what hinders them, what prevents them to go over these, to pass over these limits. Because I mean, to do something real extremist, then you have to use violence in a way, and that is of course a step, a kind of threshold that you have to go past. So that is very interesting. Most of the people that we manage to talk to do not belong to this hardcore, really violent course, but are more, you know, in the gray zones around them. So that's basically what I've been.
What's interesting about your project is that you look at both Islamic radicalism and right-wing radicalism. And those are ideologies or forms of extremism that superficially at least seem very different. Do the people who are attracted to those ideologies have something in common, or are they also different?
Yeah, that's the question. They are. I will say they are both. They are both very different, and and they also have something in common. What they have in common is that several young people who join these or are attracted into these extremist groups might have some social problems. They might be. Some have been involved in crime. They have a quite messy life. They have troublesome families and so on. So they have lots of kind of social problems that has nothing to do with the ideology to do, but they might feel outside, feel marginalized, feel lonely. So it's many dimensions that kind of works together and to become a resonance pool from which they will get closer to these extremist groups. But then you have the ideology, and there it's the big difference, as I see it. I think that right-wingers used to be more concerned with the local, with the nation, and so on, and they feel that you know, immigrants and especially Islam is something that threatens their ethnicity, their identity, their culture, and so on. But the young Muslims on the other side, they are more concerned with the world politics. The invasions of Afghanistan, of Iraq, Israel, Palestine, the use of drones, for example. I mean, if someone has had an uncle that has been killed by a US drone in Pakistan, then you get a very, you know, direct engagement against these kind of alliances that also Norway are participating in, alliance with the US. So they are more concerned with the big politics. But at the same time, they also experience being made suspicious in their everyday lives. You know, maybe they grow some beards or something, and then they got these impressions from the outside. They are suspected of being extremists and terrorists and all these kind of things. So it's many dimensions in this.
Nancy, you seem to have a...
Yes, and I think that what you're telling us is really important, because we can't talk about this in just one way or talk about this as something that's black and white. There are a lot of nuances, and there's a lot of reasons why young people turn to extremism, whether it's an extremist belief or if it's just the ideology or if you actually go out and do something about it. And I don't think we have to accept that young people do it, but we have to understand why, and understand that sometimes it's not necessarily about religion. For me, it wasn't really about me being a good Muslim or really being that big of a believer. It was about finding one identity rather than trying to be everything at once. And something that I tell young people when I travel around in Norway and talk about my book Shameless is that the easiest thing you can do is to be an extremist. The easiest choice you can make is to choose an extreme, even though you told us that they don't do it for fun, they do it because it's something that is very important for them and that they believe that this is right. But I think the easiest choice is to be extreme, while the most difficult one is to find somewhere in the middle, somewhere where you belong, and actually having to think about everything. Because whether it's right-wing extremism or Islamism or any ism out there, they give you the right answers. They tell you what to believe in very often. Well, if you're standing somewhere in the middle and you have to reflect and you have to make up your mind about different issues and make up your mind about how to react to the invasions or how to react to class issues, then you have to use a lot more capacity. And being informed and being able to get this information is the most important part of countering extremism, because I think that ignorance and just having this one-sided view about different issues might be one of the causes to why people just choose this extreme.
Bustnes?
Yeah, and I also think it's really important to understand that these groups, like the far-right, people at the far-right and the Islamists, they are like being stronger because they fight against each other. But what's really strange is that in one way they also believe in the same conspiracy theories. And that's so confusing because, as far as I understand, a lot of people at the far right that I met, they believe in these conspiracy theories about the Jews. But that's the same with the Islamists. So, and also some of the people I met in Greece, when I filmed Golden Dawn, they were at the left side. They were leftists. And then the crisis came, and in fact, so in one way I see this as a circle, because you have like the leftists and you have the far right, but then sometimes they meet in the middle down here. Because, yeah.
So what you say about the crisis is interesting, because one thing that struck me when I saw your movie was that the people who are part of the Golden Dawn in your movie they seem like fairly normal people. Well adjusted. I mean, compared to some of the people you see in, for example, Dia Khan's movie, Meeting the Enemy, they seem a lot more erratic, strange. And do you think it is because of the economic and social turmoil in Greece that it's been easier for normal people, in scare quotes, to join a movement like the Golden Dawn?
I think Greece is special because the democracy, they have a lot of problems with politicians, corruptions. You see that a lot of places, but maybe even more extreme in Greece. But I also think it's something about Golden Dawn that they try to pretend, because they are in the parliament, and they have 7%. They are the third biggest party in Greece. But they understand that if they want, of course, to become a bigger party, but then they need to pretend to be normal politicians. So I think they try to hide the neo-Nazi background, pretend to be more moderate. So that's why it's so hard for me to have them to say that they are neo-Nazis. But that's difficult for them because, of course, the hardcore fans of Golden Dawn, they are neo-Nazis. So they cannot say we are not neo-Nazis either, because then they will push away the hardcore fans. But if they say that we are neo-Nazis, then they lose the moderate voters. But I don't think it's 600,000 neo-Nazis in Greece. I think it's probably far less. So a lot of the voters of Golden Dawn, they probably don't believe in all these conspiracy theories, but it's also about the protests.
Strømmen?
I would like to say something more about the conspiracy theories in this, because I think the conspiracy theories are actually quite essential to... I mean, extremism is I mean, there are many reasons that people actually go into extremism, and it has to do with a lot of different factors. And often the debate is sort of also caricatured, where you have the people saying, oh, it's social factors, and they focus only on the social factors, and then they are opposed by people saying, no, this is all about the ideology. Fundamentally, of course, ideas are important, and that's also, I think, part of what we have to realize when we talk about extremism. We should perhaps talk about the ideas instead, and about their ideas as well as our ideas, and how they differ. But another element that comes up in extremism is, of course, conspiracy theories, and that's one of the set of ideas. There's always a conspiracy. Very often, it boils down to the Jews. And if you read, if you read literature from the so-called Islamic State, you will find the Jews. And if you read from the extreme right, sooner or later they pop up there as well. And if you have conspiracy theories which are just about, say, 9/11, then also when you start digging into it, the anti-Semitic theories turn up. And then you have to question yourself, where does these ideas come from? What makes the conspiracy idea or the conspiracy theory believable or popular, or what gives it a kind of force of explanation? Where does that come from? And there's two things, I think, that are driving factors in this, and I think one of them is a lack of confidence, because the Greece is actually, I think, a rather good example, because it wasn't after the financial crisis really that Golden Dawn started to really grow. It was after the established politicians were not able to tackle the issues that were the financial crisis, and then you got a confidence crisis. And this confidence crisis had lots of effects in Greece. It led to the growth of Golden Dawn. It also led to the growth eventually of the radical leftist alliance. And because people didn't believe in the centrist politicians anymore, they had no faith in them, and that confidence crisis was the actual there. And the same kind of element you find within conspiracy theories, the confidence crisis, the lack of confidence in whatever is established, is important. And the other thing that is also a driving factor is fear of change, fear of the society changing around you, and you're trying to look and find explanations for this. And of course, most people that don't have confidence in the elites, maybe even for good reasons, or that are afraid of things changing around them, don't end up being conspiracy theorists. But conspiracy theorists thrive on this, and extremists thrive on this. So those are the elements. And then you actually have to start taking a look at the society and ask yourself what makes it more popular. So, and there is a connection between the ideas and the social factors, because if you have a society where there is lack of confidence, or where there is fear and where there is things going on that makes people distrust the established, then of course you will have a better market for extreme ideas. And that's why in Norway we don't have a very big problem with extremism, because Norway is a relatively safe country. We have a lot of welfare, etc., etc. There is a problem there, but it's not very big. But in other societies where you have more problems, there is a better chance.
You recently went to Moldova, a country that's been plagued by political instability and corruption for quite some time. What was the market for extreme ideas like there?
I mean, Moldova is a society which is ridden by corruption, and whenever I sort of read about Moldovan politics, it almost makes me religious in the fact that I almost thank God for not being Moldovan. And of course, in a society like that, conspiracy theories have they are better off. They are not dominating. They don't play a dominating role in Moldovan politics in a sense, because Moldovan politics is dominated by oligarchs and by sort of other things. But of course, if you have a situation like that where there is actually very good reason to distrust the elites, the establishment, whatever, then there is a more fruitful ground. That doesn't necessarily mean that that it will grow. I mean, that's also the interesting thing is I've looked at Belgium, to take an example, and the interesting thing, if you look at Belgium and you look at people from Belgium leaving for Syria, you will see that there have been a lot of people leaving from the north, from Flanders, and few people from the south. And it's not like you can't find towns in the south which have all these social issues that we are often talking about, but where almost no one has left. And that, I think, boils down to the actual what people very rarely talk about when they have these overlook, namely that individuals matter. Each and every individual has a role to play there. And that actually, if you start looking, for instance, in Molenbeek, which is so often talked about, you will find that it boils down to 2 or 3 individuals that were central in the whole recruitment networks. And everywhere you can draw the lines back to those individuals. And in that other town, maybe they didn't have those individuals. But the social factors, of course, make it easier.
Vestel and then Herz?
Yes. While Øyvind was talking, I was thinking about the importance of confidence. I have one example. It was a young guy that I met he told me he had been bullied all his life, lots of trouble, petty crime and so on, but being bullied, and he felt very low. And then he experienced one evening, he and a friend were attacked by a group of young people with immigrant background, and they were beaten quite badly. Then he took a phone to a famous right-wing leader in an organization, Norwegian organization called Vigrid, very concerned with Old Norse mythology and so on. And he became a member of Vigrid, he and his friend. And he said that suddenly I felt power. I felt that now people were afraid of me. They went away. He had all these, black clothes with swastikas and all these kind of things. And he said that people were shunning him on the streets. And he really felt power. He really felt good in a way, because it made him, boosted his confidence. And that's quite an important thing, I think, for young people. That might one dimension that's very important for going into a right-wing, in this case, extremist group. And this also, of course, has to do with conspiration theories, because conspiracy theory is something that make you feel that you know something that no one else, that the other ones doesn't know. And it gives you a feeling of power, a feeling of understanding the world in a way that are quite unique for you. And that all these kind of things are pointing to the importance of emotions. That's very important. I can stop there, but that was something that's a very important dimension in understanding extremism.
Did this young person you talk about eventually leave Vigrid, the neo-Nazi organization?
Yeah, he went into it.
Yeah, he went into it, but then did he leave?
Yes, and that is also an interesting thing, because he was inside there for a couple of years, but then he met a girl. And she became pregnant. And he felt that, or they understood that as long as they were in Vigrid, they would have lots of trouble with childcare and all, the authorities and so on. So he started to get a little bit uncertain about things. And gradually he changed his mind. He had to go to another part of the country because these Vigrid people were kind of following him and come back and so on. But then he got he had to work together with some Turks. He had to in a restaurant, and gradually they became friends. So that was this dissolvement of his career as a right-winger. But then again, emotions, very important.
I would like to just draw some parallels. I think it's really interesting what you're talking about ideology, or if it's the social structures that are the problems. And this reminds me of some of the research that's done about Holocaust. And one of the questions is it about ideology or is it about the bureaucracy? And could it happen here? Could it happen everywhere? Or is it because of something that's specific to a country? And you were talking about Norway being stable, but what are the factors that could make this happen here in Norway? And most importantly, what are the factors that make young people go to Syria from Norway, from a street in Østfold, where few young people actually did go, and they were in the same neighborhood? And we have to ask ourselves these questions. And I think it's relevant to talk about the ideologies, and it's important to talk about the social structures, but most importantly, the emotions. And it's not only about the emotions that the young people who actually do those things have, it's also about the sentiment in our society. Even though Norway is stable, we still see a rise in right-wing extremism in Europe, and we still see young people feeling attracted to these ideas. And at the same time, there is this rhetoric of scaring people. So emotions actually do matter, because even though we don't have parties like the Golden Dawn in Norway, we still have populist parties in our parliament, and we still have extreme parties that are not in parliament, and we still have single politicians, individual politicians, who go out there and they say things that you couldn't have said in the Norwegian media 10 years ago about refugees, about immigrants, about people who are unemployed, and they just say these things and no one holds them accountable. And I think that it's really important that, thank you. And I think it's really important that we take these emotions seriously and that we take these people seriously, even though the leaders of their parties say that I wouldn't have said it in this way, which is one of the most famous phrases of the Norwegian Prime Minister, is I wouldn't have said it in this way. Even though the leader of their party would go out there and say that this person is talking as an individual, not as part of the party, there are people out there who are watching them on TV and who are reading the news or who are scrolling on Facebook who will believe what they're saying. And I just want to state that we should hold them accountable, but that doesn't mean that we're blaming them for young people going to Syria. Everyone should be accountable for their own actions, and everyone should be accountable for whether it's going to an Islamist organization or right-wing extremist organization as a result of hearing those things and as a result of the climate that we're living in. But at the same time, we have to look at the factors that are making it easier to do so. We have to look at the voices who are making it more acceptable to say extreme things. And we also have to look at the pushback. If a young person who is really scared of immigrants in Norway chooses to go to Vigrid or to another extreme organization in Norway, there will be a pushback, because this young Muslim girl or boy who is the target of this hate will also feel the need to protect themselves. And if they don't feel like the community around them, that the greater society is speaking up and saying that this is unacceptable, they will go to Islamist organizations, because everyone needs to feel like someone is protecting them. So when you said that there isn't 600,000 right-wing extremists in Greece, I totally agree. There are 600,000 scared people in Greece, and we have to address that fear.
So Bustnes, at the end of your talk, you also mentioned the way we talk to each other here in Norway, and that it has changed in some way. Does what Nancy is saying resonate with you?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I also think that the question if this could happen in Norway, it's an important question. And it's important to remember that in Greece, Golden Dawn was a really small party. They were had I think it was 0.3% in all the elections where they participated, and then the financial crisis came, and we had the refugee crisis, and as you said, the politicians didn't tackle it very well, and then Golden Dawn had 7%. So this happened during 3-4 years. So yes, we don't know. Now we have a safe system, we have good economy, but if we have a financial crisis in Norway after the oil, for example, we never know. So this is serious, and so the big question is, how can we stop this? And my characters in Golden Dawn, it's too late, because they are so afraid, and they have their own newspapers, they have their own web TV. They doesn't trust normal media outlets. So it's too late. So not too late, but it's very difficult. So I think, of course, education is very, very important, and what we are doing now, we have to discuss it. And I've been screening the film to teachers in the Norwegian schools, and one of them said that no, we cannot show this film to the pupils because it's too political. Yes, but we have to discuss this. And it's too, because this far right, this conspiracy theories, they are in the internet. If you search for something on the internet, it doesn't take very long time before you have all these things, and then we need to prepare the students for this. We have to discuss it.
Did the teacher explain to you why he thought the movie was too political?
Yeah, he said that one reason was that they had in the class, they had one student where the parents were a far right. And he was afraid that they would be sad. Yeah.
Well, I think it was Strømmen first and then Vestel.
Well, I think it's a very difficult question to answer, the question of what should we do, because this again boils down to the fact that people are drawn to extremism for so many different reasons. And some of those things we can address, some of the things we can't, or it's more difficult. And it's obvious that something of this has to do with a feeling of being an outsider. And I think even the way we talk about extremism, we do that. If we talk about extremism in Norway, there's a tendency that if we talk about extremism, we do talk about right-wing extremism, but often we think about extremist Islamism. And if we talk about extremist Islamism, then it's not really our problem. It's not problem to us, it's a problem to someone else. It's their problem. It's a problem for the Muslims, it's a problem amongst the Muslims, whatever. And some people go further and say that it's the Muslim, they are the problem. And I think that actually is one of the most sort of dangerous things here, because when someone growing up in Fredrikstad or in sort of outside of Haugesund or in Nord-Trøndelag end up going to Syria to fight on the behalf of a group which is one of the sort of most thoroughly extremist groups that you can imagine, then that's our problem. Something has made them do this, and that was something that exists within our society. And those ideas that they, of course, promote, that's also a problem to us. It's a danger to us, there's a risk to us. If they do this because they have sort of felt that they have been betrayed by society or that they're outsiders, that's also our problem. And very often we have a tendency to talk about, okay, this is something that happens to like, it's the kids of the Muslims, the other guys, they are the ones that are leaving. But it's our kids. And it was very interesting for me. I did some time to also try and get across this point to look at, because there is a number of people also of ethnically Norwegian background that have gone to Syria, and also people of backgrounds that are foreign or partly foreign, but that have no connection with the Muslim world. And it's very interesting to go into and look at their backstories, because these backstories are actually quite similar to many of the people that are Muslim background. And then you have people that have fallen outside of society, they've had problems getting education, they've had problems with crime, they've had problems with drugs. Quite a few of them have started with beliefs in conspiracy theories that were not connected to extremist Islamism, but were just conspiracy theories, and then gradually moved on. And all of these things are problems that actually do exist in our society. When I said that I think that we have less of these problems in Norway, it's because the numbers of groups like that, and also the numbers of active extreme right-wingers, and I'm not just talking about people sitting on the internet writing shit, but people that are actively involved in extremist right-wing groups like neo-Nazi groups. These are very low numbers in Norway, and the reason for that is because Norway is a society where it's not that tempting to become an extremist in the first place. But for some people, it is, and that also tells us something that we have to do something about in our society, and it's our problem. And we have to also realize that we're in this together. It's not like it's only someone else's problem. We're in it together. And then, I think it returns to the necessity to speak about values. When we talk about extremism, instead we should talk about which are the ideas that are promoted and which are not. And what do the extremists actually play on? Yeah, I have something more to say, but I can wait.
You can do it later. Listen just briefly, and then we'll open the floor for questions.
Okay, what to do about it? That's the main question. It's the biggest one. I must say that I have some faith in schools, because schools are institutions where all of us are meeting each other in a way. And schools are also institutions for education about politics, about religion, about how to behave to each other. And if schools could really function as they were thought, as they, according to this kind of ideal, then I think it would be very nice. And it should be possible. I think that when I was talking about big politics, that's very important for young Muslims. Then where should not big politics be a natural place to discuss, if not in school? I mean, you could discuss the invasion of Iraq, the use of drones in Afghanistan and Yemen. You could discuss Israel and Palestine. But these are, of course, very touchy, very touchy themes. And for many teachers, they have not, they are not clear for themselves what they mean in these issues. But I think that a very important thing is, at least has to be that the school should be an arena where it is possible to discuss these kind of things, where you can have a guy with an uncle from Pakistan being killed by a US drone that can come to the classroom and to say that this is what happened to my family. And that's very important, and to get kind of taken seriously by the teachers, and perhaps and ideally to be taken seriously in this area, in this classroom, as a place where they can meet each other.
Then we'll take your questions. We can't actually see you, so please, when you ask your questions, stand up and present yourself.
This is on, yeah. Hi, my name is Monica. Thank you for the very interesting conversation so far. My question is mostly directed to Håvard Bustnes, but of course I'm interested in everybody's answer. You spoke about following the women that were in the Golden Dawn Party. And I wanted to expand on that topic to ask you what role you think that women play in perpetuating extremism amongst their communities, or through their roles in the family, through their roles as mothers. I think that a lot of people associate extremism with very masculine behavior. But, for example, there are cases of women leaving the Western countries to join ISIS themselves as fighters or as in other roles. Or in the US, the extremist Westboro Baptist Church is spearheaded by women and their children. And I may be wrong, but I have yet to discover an extremist group that supports gender equality. So where do you think that women fit into this debate about extremist political movements, and how can we be more gender inclusive in the debate? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for a very important question, which we haven't addressed yet, and I think it's really important, because yes, in Greece, I filmed 3 women, and they are like the wife, the daughter of the leaders in the party, and they play a very important role. They are well educated. They are not marginalized in any way. I don't see them as victims in any way. They have a good economy, but they really believe in this. They have read a lot of books. They know what they are talking about, and they promote. They go out in the election. They have speeches. But of course, in Greece, the situation were special because the men were in prison. So the women had to make a leading role, but when the men, so it's very complicated, because Golden Dawn, they believe in traditional family values, that women should be home with the kids and this old-fashioned stuff, but in the same time the women played an important role in Greece. So I don't have like a very simple answer on that, but I think yes, the women have an important role. They do promote the values. Of course, they educate the children to be a part of this ideology, which is really scary. So yes, the women are very important.
Vestel, you had a comment?
Yeah, a little bit. I think that my experience is that the role of gender and of women especially varies very, very much from different groups. You have in Norway, you have and Sweden, you have this group called the Nordic Resistance Movement, and they promote an extremely conservative gender role with women primarily for you know, taking care of kids and giving birth. That's one example. Then you have more, you know, a little bit more modern and hip and cool, the identitarian movements that are kind of promoting a view on a wish for a white Europe, but they are much more modern in their ways of dealing with gender. And you also have SIAN, that is Stop Islamization of Norway. It's lots of such organizations out there. And they are very, very liberal. They are defending women's rights, transgender, homosexuality, and so on. Because, and it seems to me that this is because they see this as the fundamentally opposite values as Islam. That's the logic of it. So the answer is that it's quite, you know, varied, many answers to that, many different ways of doing it.
Strømmen?
Yeah, I would just like to make a quick remark on one point there. I mean, of course, you will find extremist groups that believe in gender equality. They will not be on the extreme right because it doesn't fit with the ideology. And they will not be extreme Islamists because it does certainly not fit with the ideology. But there are groups on the extreme left which has indeed preached gender equality. And I think if you take a look at groups like the so-called Red Army faction in Germany, which was behind a number of terrorist activities, or the Japanese Red Army, which, okay, had some very strange views on gender, but also there was an element of gender equality thinking in these groups. So that's an important part as well. And while we often speak about the extreme right and about extreme Islamism, maybe extreme the extreme left isn't talked that much about, also because there's no really, I mean, the actual violent extreme left doesn't really have a tradition in Norway, so here we don't talk that much about that. Violence from the extreme left is often targeting people on the extreme right, or maybe throwing an egg at someone, rather than blowing up a bomb. But this is not the case in the rest of Europe, and there are indeed groups where you can find ideology that might indeed seem like they are right on all these issues. Gender equality is an important thing, and they talk about gender equality too. And then, of course, there are other factors that actually make them into what we see as an extremist group. And that's also, I think, it's important to remember. In many ways, I think it's important to remember that any kind of ideology has a potential for extremism. Whether you are an environmentalist or you're on the left or the right, or etc., there is a chance for, or a potential for extremism there. And it also sort of boils down to the same thing. It's not always about the others. We have to look at ourselves as well and think about what could make me into an extremist. And I think that's an important question to ask.
I think we have another question.
Is it turned on? Yeah. Okay, hello, my name is Yannick and I'm from Germany. First of all, thanks for your talks and the discussion. I really enjoyed it. And I think my question addresses mainly to Øyvind, but actually to all of you. So you said at the beginning that in order to be able to discuss extremism, we have to define the norm and kind of the boundaries. So we have a sort of spectrum to discuss extremism. And yeah, for example, 200 years ago, yeah, okay. 200 years ago, nobody would have thought that. Yeah, I just do it without the.
I think you're being censored.
Yeah. Well, 200 years ago, for example, nobody would have thought that women get voting rights or whatever, and today it's the norm, which is a pretty good thing, I think. So this is a good example that the spectrum we once defined was redefined. So we kind of shifted the whole spectrum. But there are also negative aspects. For example, in Germany, after 1933, the anti-Semitic attitude was considered as the norm. And today we don't consider it as the norm anymore. So you see that this spectrum, it constantly shapes, and we always adjust it to kind of our contemporary worldview. And my question now is, do you think that humankind at one point would be able to kind of define a spectrum which doesn't change anymore, so that we will be able to figure out like an absolute kind of extremism and define a total spectrum which won't change in time anymore, so that we get like a constant worldview concerning this? By this I mean like social aspects, but also political aspects. Thank you.
Well, that's a big question. Well, to put it like this, I mean, the reason I made these examples is because extremism, in a sense, is it's a word that is, it's in a way it's meaningless. I mean, in a way, it's a meaningless word because you have to put meaning into it, and therefore it varies over time. And as you said, anti-Semitism was the norm. And then, of course, if you were not an anti-Semite, then perhaps you were an extremist. And I think, of course, I mean, but it comes down to sort of an end of history view. And I think that's well, things aren't looking too good for Francis Fukuyama these days, although he's written very interesting stuff lately. But of course, I have a hope, that we will arrive to some values that I think are important. I mean, and of course, democracy is one of them. Gender equality is one of them. But I mean, there are places in the world today where you're an extremist if you believe in gender equality. And human rights, of course, as well. There are certain human rights where you can go places in the world today and they will be considered to be extremist ideas. The idea of freedom of religion, some people will consider that to be extremist. The idea of freedom of speech, etc. So whether we will reach a level, I mean, my point in all of this is that actually talking about extremism is perhaps not that interesting. Instead, it's interesting to talk about the ideas, because this is a battle of ideas, and that battle of ideas happens on a background, and all the social factors and all the things that we have talked about, and emotions, etc., that play a role, psychology. But it's also a battle of ideas. And I think that's the point that I'm trying to get across. And then your question really is, will that battle ever be won? Well, I hope so. But I can't say anything more than that. And the future is a very long time.
Several people want to comment. I actually wanted to ask you, Nancy, about this, because you described a process where you tried to be the perfect Muslim because you felt like an outsider. And do you think that if we discovered the right values in some way, the right moral principles, would we get rid of extremism?
No, I think it's really difficult to talk about this issue, just as you said, because everything is, or a lot of things are relative, and in order for our society to function, we have to believe that some things are true. Because if we believe that everything is relative and nothing is ever solid, we are not able to have a functioning society. But you mentioned ideas as something that we have to talk about, and I added a few things to this list, because I think that extremism is the consequence of a lot of things. It's not necessarily the cause of anything, but it's the consequence of some ideas where you believe that some people are different than others or better than others. It's the consequence of feeling stigmatized. It's the consequence of marginalization. It's the consequence of not having any other options and feeling like this is the only choice. And I hope and I believe that if we're able to show people the alternatives, that there is another way, that there is a way of thinking about the way we live our lives and the way we treat others and the way we believe that societies have to work, then we might be able to prevent extremism, hopefully. And I also think it's important to be consistent, because if I go around believing that right-wing extremism or Islamism is the right thing, and at the same time I want people to treat me in a certain way, and that's why I believe in this, and I want certain rights for myself and for my children, and I don't want these rights for other people, then you're not being consistent. And most people want to have good lives, and even though, no matter what the ideology is, and no matter what you believe in, it's most often for the better cause, whatever that cause is, I think, I believe. And if we're able to be consistent, and if I'm able to think that, okay, I want to have a good life for me and my children, and that's why you should have it too, we might be able to combat extremism. So being able to raise these boundaries, these differences between us and them is a good place to start. A good place to start is not believing that people are different from us, but actually meeting them. And in my experience, meeting people and talking to them shows us that we're not really that different. And you mentioned Dia Khan. She goes out there and she meets the extremists and she shows them that this is me. Do you hate me? Do you really believe that Muslims are that awful? I'm a Muslim and I'm a brown woman. And I think what's ironic is that they'll still find a way of othering her or othering people like me from the rest of the group, saying that, yeah, but you're different, you're integrated, you're this or you're that. But meeting people is a good way to start.
Bustnes?
Yeah, just a very short remark, because I think one thing that defines extremists are their willingness to use violence against democratic values. That's the same on the Islamists or the far right. So, and that's something we should try to fight.
Yeah, I think it is quite. Do you hear?
Yeah.
It's quite necessary also to bring in another perspective when you're speaking about extremism as the willing to use violence to push your political statements. I mean, there is also what we might call the radicalization of the states, because states might use their violence in a very political way, and they say that this is legitimate to do it. But if you take Israel and Palestine, for a Palestine, he will not say that the violence that the Israeli state has been used against him and his family is legitimate at all. So to have this kind of definition, we need to have some sort of idea of legitimacy. That's one thing. And the second thing that I would like to say is that our drive towards human rights, democracy, whatever that is a continual process that we have to engage in all the time, and to involve as many people as possible in that discussion and in that dialogue. And that is the only hope that we will reach something to agree upon.
And I would want to add something to what you're saying, which makes this even more complex. And I think legitimacy is a very important word, because not everything that's legitimate or legal, or not everything that's legal is necessarily legitimate. And just see the example of Nazism and the Holocaust in Germany. It was in a lot of ways legal, but it wasn't legitimate, and it wasn't a good thing. So we have to keep making these definitions, and we have to keep pushing back and re-evaluating our values, because, or else we will end up in a world where the states are the ones who are committing the violence.
Now, you also wanted to comment, but I just need to ask, how many questions are there now? I think we're going to move on to the next question instead of taking further comments from the panel. So please, next one.
Hi, I'm Angelina. I'm also from Germany. Thank you very much for the talk. Very inspiring and thought-provoking. My question is extremism actually a problem, or is it the not yet extreme that is difficult to grasp? Because if we have an extreme, we can already name it. We can have already organizations that we can give names, or they gave themselves names and an agenda. But I wonder if the unsystemized radical thinking, the everyday racism, and the that we cannot actually put the names on there yet, if that's actually a thing we should think about, especially in the Norwegian context, where we have a populist party in the government and still refuse to accept that there could be something like a radicalization in progress. Thanks.
It's a really good question, and I won't be able to answer it specifically, but I want to say something about that. I think the definitions are really important, and we have to keep insisting on calling, as you said, populist ideas and extremist ideas, calling them extremism, and using the right definitions and using the right words. And as we heard here, it's really difficult to find these right words, but we still have to do that work every single day and call out for example, the everyday racism or the everyday subtle comments about you being different, and we have to call them out. And the most horrifying thing, I think, is not having the words and not having the language to talk about these issues, and giving people the language and the tools to define those issues and to evaluate the feelings that they have and talk about their experiences is a really good way to start fighting extremism and combating racism.
Next question?
But yeah.
Oh, someone had a comment? Because I think I saw about 6 questions, so we should take all of them. Please.
Yes. My name is Alex from Austria, and my question goes to the representative from there. You were talking about self-confidence and the feeling of having no power when you told us the story about this person joining that right-wing organization. And my question is, what work is done to raise young people's self-confidence in order that they don't even, have the need to join or search for any organization? And how much value do politicians and does society give to that work?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think that it might be, it's many different ways of doing that, trying to create confidence to young people who experience things like that. Of course, I mentioned school. When school is working well and you have teachers that are, a little bit wise, then they should be able to say something or to do something to help this guy who had experienced these kind of things. Another institution that I feel is very important in Norway, at least, it's what we call youth clubs. And there are clubs for young people where they can come without having they don't have to pay anything. They can just come there and hang around. And when youth clubs are working very well, when they have good grown-ups that have lots of confidence among the members, then they will be able to take care of these cares that young people that have experienced these kind of things can bear to them. So they have to have some sort of arena where they can come with their concerns and with their experiences and be taken seriously. And I don't think that the police would be able to do it, but good teachers and maybe good social workers, youth workers could be the ones that could do it.
Would that have helped someone like you, Nancy, not sort of edging towards the extremist path?
Absolutely, and in some way it did, because when I was, a while after all this happened, I met an NGO, a volunteer organization, for the first time. And I, just like you, believe that these arenas, just both the youth clubs, but also the volunteer sector, where you can contribute to society in a good way, actually do matter. And in Norway we have a very strong volunteer sector. There are more than 100,000 organizations that work for different issues, and ISFiT is based on volunteerism, and I just want to give a big shout out to all the people who made this happen, because that's incredible. And there are 500 volunteers just here at ISFiT, and that means that there are 500 people who are not bored or are not feeling so alone that they want to go out there and do something extreme, and we actually have to acknowledge that. And I know it sounds silly, but it's true, because for some young people, if you don't have soccer training, or if you don't have the youth club, and if you don't have Amnesty, which was the case for me, then you'll use your spare time and your energy doing things that might not be good for you. And these are resourceful young people. They don't do it because they're bad. They do it because they have nowhere else to turn very often. And I think that very young people don't necessarily care that much about the ideology as they would do about feeling like they belong somewhere. So go out and volunteer. That's the message.
So I'm getting signs that our time is almost up, and I think that's a fitting note to end on. So I want you all to thank our panel, Nancy Herz, Håvard Bustnes, Øyvind Strømmen, and Viggo Vestel. And also thank you to the people who contributed to making this run as smoothly as it did. We almost didn't even notice that I think a lot of people came in here late. If they did, I didn't notice. So thank you to the technicians, sound people, and everyone else. Thank you.
And thank you.